Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for coming out tonight. And thanks to Andy Hershey for inviting me. And I don't know how to express how cool I think Garrett College is. I think this is such a unique institution. And I look at that course list, and part of me is like, where were you guys when I needed you? However, that's another story. But thank you all for coming out, and I think what you got going on here at Garrett College is absolutely fantastic. So we are Purple Lizard Maps, the Department of Adventure. And as you mentioned, my name is Mike Hermann. I'm going to tell you who we are, how we got here, how we make our Purple Lizard maps, and why people love them so much. Who we are, you would think we're map makers. Certainly we're map makers. But actually who we are is we're storytellers, and we're geographers, we're artists, and we're outdoor rec enthusiasts. So all of that is sort of part of the package that results in the Purple Lizard map product that you see. Our goal basically is to combine the best of Old World cartography, the artistic side of Old World cartography, and to some extent the storytelling of Old World cartography, but in the digital era, because we're in a very different era now for map making. So trying to combine that with digital design and trying to make a map that's as comprehensive and pretty and interesting as we can. And really what we want you to do is we want people to think differently about maps, how you interact with them, what they can do for you. Maps are strange things, right? Everybody's seen a map. Now that we've got maps on our phones, there's a level of cartographic literacy that didn't exist before. There's an expectation of maps. There's a reliance on maps that might have sort of gone a little bit too far with our ability to punch in addresses and rely on following a dot to be told how to get somewhere. And there's also a dearth of data that's not really valid. It's not really correct. So we end up navigating through all of that stuff to produce our maps. This is our latest map. We did a 2-map series of Shenandoah National Park, Shenandoah North and South. So you can see on the screen up there, that's 2 sides, the front and back, of our north map. So in mapping directional language, that is the north and south side of the north Shenandoah map. And the south map picks up where that left off and continues south to the end of Skyline Drive in Shenandoah National Park. We partner with Tread Lightly. They share our ethics with trying to convey outdoor ethics, and we want to share that knowledge with our customer base. We are part of 1% for the Planet, so we give back 1% of our sales each year, and we break that up largely into different recipients in the communities that we map. And our maps are available on Avenza Maps if you want the digital version of them. And there's a strength to a digital version, but our love is actually of the big map, right? We like that idea that you can lay out a big map and you're not limited by a 2-inch screen, and you can plan your route. You can also see all the things in that landscape that you wouldn't normally see, and certainly that you can't see on a 2-inch screen. And to that end, we are really trying to take a landscape and unlock it for people. We're trying to pull all the recreational assets to the front. So you've all had highway maps, right? You stop at the visitor center, you get the map of Maryland, right? Well, that's not going to help you go hiking. It's not even really going to help you find a boat launch or find a place to camp. It might have some state parks noted on it, but it's a transportation map, right? So it's all about the interstate. That's what you see. The interstate's the most important thing, and then maybe like county lines are the most important things, and all the things that the Maryland State Department of Transportation thinks are very important things in their world, and that's what they're trying to share with you. So we're trying to spin that model to the outdoor rec audience, and we're trying to share with you all the things that an outdoor enthusiast wants to do. So we're not making a hiking map, we're not making a mountain biking map, we're not making a paddling map, we're making all of those things on one map. We're also opening it up a little bit bigger than just, like in this case, Shenandoah National Park, because public lands are surrounded by private lands and communities. And those gateway communities all have assets in them. And so we want to elevate those communities as well and make them part of that whole fabric. Because really, culturally, the public lands don't really exist without the gateway communities around them. A close-up of a crop of a section of our Shenandoah National Park map. And I think this sort of certainly shows the artistic side. We spend a lot of time working on the shaded relief models and the contour lines. We work to generate our own contour line interval models based on the topography and the scale of the map so that they're not too dense and overwhelming, or they don't make giant gaps, so you look at the contour lines and you're like, ooh, I didn't realize that was 1,000 feet. We also want to make it clear that if you're on Knob Mountain Trail, you're going to be hiking on the spine of Knob Mountain, right on the ridge. So that shaded relief, to get that really soft enough to show that, put that side in shadow, and then get the sense that if you're going to do that loop on Jeremy's run trail, you're going to be dancing along a drainage to get out. We also want to pull out features that are, like in this case, Skyline Drive, right? That's if you've been to Shenandoah National Park, it's all about Skyline Drive. It's a 105-mile long paved ribbon of road that runs along the ridge, and everything happens off of that. And the way you navigate on Skyline Drive is by mile markers. So those purple circles with the numbers, that's your reference. If you were to ask a park ranger or get a guidebook and say, I want to hike this trail, the first thing it's going to say is like, oh, go to mile marker 62. That's where your day is going to start. So we want to pull that information out. We also want to have a little bit of fun with it. So you can see in the top there, we sprinkle some interesting quotes on our map. So we have a map up there from a quote from Sasquatch. And then we also want to acknowledge native history. And native history is an important part of all the places we map. And it's also a really tricky and complicated story to tell. So we're trying to acknowledge that in a way that is respectful of the people that were here before us and sort of put it in context with what that landscape is like today. We also want to acknowledge those gateway towns. So Waynesboro, Virginia is at the southern end of Skyline Drive. And on most maps of Shenandoah National Park, it will just have a dot and it'll say Waynesboro, and it won't really give Waynesboro any love. But we based out of Waynesboro when we were making the map, quite a few nights in Waynesboro, and it's a lovely town. It's a really neat town. And it has all these assets. So it has a lovely rail trail bike path along the river. It has a river that used to be so radically polluted from industry that it wasn't even useful. And now it's actually like a designated top fly fishing trout river. It's been completely cleaned up. There's all these other things happening there that don't really show up on other maps, but they're part of that, like elevating all those recreational assets that a community has. That little Blue Ridge tunnel trail, that thing is only like 2 miles long, and it's so cool. And then in the black text underneath the interstate, we talk about the history of that tunnel. And of course, that's been decommissioned for trains. There's a live track that runs right next to it, so when you're there, if you're into trains, and a lot of people are into trains, it's a place where train watchers go to hang out for the live track. But to ride that little rail trail, even though it's so small, it's just a really satisfying thing, and most of the world blasts past that to get somewhere else. So trying to elevate all those rec assets, tell people like the AT through hikers, Waynesboro really caters to them if you want to get off the trail for a day or two. You'll find hostels, you'll find free places to camp. They really go out of their way to cater to AT hikers. So that's just sort of an example of how it's not just about the park, it's about these gateway communities and what assets they might have, because they're all part of the visitor experience, or they should be, right? If you look at the other maps, you'd be like, why would I stop at Waynesboro? This is an example of a legend. This is the Shenandoah map. And so again, like that analogy to a transportation map where a legend is going to be like, this is an interstate highway, and this is a township road, and this is a county road, and all that. Like, we don't care, right? I don't care what the political jurisdiction management of the road is. What I care about is like, is it a primary route? So that's really what we're separating is to like the primary route in red If you want to get somewhere fast or cut through a landscape, do it that way. If you're bike packing, you probably just want to know if it's a paved road, and then we also pull out the dirt roads, and that's probably one of the hardest parts of our job. We'll talk about that later when we talk about how we make the maps. If there's major hiking trails on there, we want to show them and make them easy to find. We put the mileage distance between trails on all of our newer maps. That's a new upgrade. And then the usual type of symbols for campgrounds and things like that. But again, it's really specific to outdoor rec, what's important. At the bottom of that list, you'll see our lizard. And we're vague in our legend. The lizard just says this could mean anything. And the lizards turn out to be kind of the funnest part of our maps because people go out chasing lizards because we don't really tell you what you're going to find when you get out there. It could be a scenic overlook, it could be a vista, it could be a waterfall, it could be a 300-year-old tree, it could just be a really neat rock outcropping or a cave. It's usually something that, you know, you might not otherwise have a reason to think that's really worthy to make the effort to go see. Currently we have 17 maps, so we're a central Pennsylvania company. That's where we started. So in the middle of central Pennsylvania, our maps sort of that's the origin of them. So there was like some organic growth of making a map and then making an adjacent map and another map. But now we've expanded quite a bit in the last decade. So now we're doing maps in Ohio, West Virginia, Virginia, and we have a map in Puerto Rico. So if you're surfers or want to go surfing, go to Rincon. Our map will show you all the surf breaks. And of course, we're going to be adding Deep Creek and Savage. I don't quite know what we're going to title that map. The title back there says Deep Creek and Garrett County. Because we can't just give Savage all the love because there's Potomac and Garrett also. And obviously that says summer 2023, and so that didn't happen. But our maps take a long time to make. We'll get into explaining why that didn't happen. You can find out a lot about us on our website. That's where you can order maps direct if they're not available in your local outfitters. And we have adventure blogs and some other stuff on there. Hopefully your local outfitter stocks our maps, and you can find one there. Again, the goal with our maps and the reason people like them and they pick up a copy and then they usually they're like, wow, this is not what I expected. You know, and what's another map that these guys make? That's our goal. That's what we're trying to do. And we get really lovely emails and notes and sometimes handwritten cards and letters from our customer base. And it just reinforces that we're sort of doing it the right way. We're offering a different experience with a paper map than people would expect. So how did this happen? How did Purple Lizard maps mature and get to what they are today? And for that, we're going to go back into the 90s when I was in college. I was very fortunate to get a wonderful education at Penn State University. The faculty there is very well known, was then and still is today. Their geography department is one of the best in the country. They also had a digital cartography lab at a time when only 2 other universities in the US had a digital cartography lab. So that was, I was first generation digital map maker. So that timing was very helpful for launching my career. I did not go to Penn State to become a map maker. I chose geography because I had spent most of my 20s mountain biking and snowboarding and sleeping in cars and dirt bagging at trailheads and climbing. And I just, you know, I had a tremendous fear of corporate life, and I thought, well, geography, that'll probably get me into some kind of a job where I can be outdoors. You know, maybe I'll end up, you know, who knows, but geography sounds good, right? I like geography. I like playing around in mountains. I'll be a geographer. Well, you know, it was very fortunate because I just blossomed when I took the first cartography class and then got involved in the cartography lab there, and they had a student lab, and I got involved in real world projects. And then I got a job offer before I even graduated from Trails Illustrated, which is like the biggest recreational map company in the country. At that time, they were Trails Illustrated. They were in the process of being purchased by National Geographic Maps, but same company. And I was part of a very small team, a 3-person team, to take their product line into the digital era. So I thought, man, this is a dream job, right? They're in Evergreen, Colorado. They're in the Rockies. I went out. I rented a basement apartment in a house owned by a river guide. Like, all my people seemed to be there. Everything was falling into place. The problem was, I had come out of this very creative college program where there were no boundaries, and the digital tools, you could do all these new things. And Trails Illustrator was like, well, we just want you to make the maps look just like we've been making them by hand, but use a computer. And we were like, okay, that's kind of anticlimactic, but we can do that for you. So their maps have come a long way since. Now they have embraced digital, and they look very different. But at the time, I did that for a couple years, and I got really creatively frustrated. I also got geographically frustrated because I don't know how many of you have experience out west. The western landscape is lovely. But if you grew up in Appalachia or you know the Appalachian Mountains, we're so much more accessible here. And that western landscape was great. But this whole thing of like getting up at 4 in the morning to start a car shuttle, to drop bikes, to go on a great mountain bike ride, to then get your car shuttle, to then get back, and it's a 10-hour odyssey. And I was like, gosh, in Pennsylvania, like, I could be at a trailhead in 10 minutes, and there was nobody else there. In Evergreen and Colorado, Denver and Boulder, like, if you're not at the trailhead by 4:45 p.m., it's filled by 5. Like, you can't even get in there to play. And then you're behind everybody. You're just in this train of people, whether you're hiking or climbing. It doesn't even make sense to pass them because there's just more people in front of them. And then you get to this great overlook, and there's 30 people up there, and you're like, this is not my wilderness experience I was after. And people would say, you're from Pennsylvania, oh, you're a flatlander. I was like, we're not flat. They're like, oh, you guys don't have mountains? I'm like, oh, okay, we do. They're not 14ers, but we have mountains. So I had this map inside of me. I was like, I've got to make a map of a landscape that I know, that I love, that I grew up in, that I want to use all my design skills that I have here fresh out of college. So I quit the first real job I ever had, and I moved back to my college apartment with some of my college roommates, and I started to make the first Purple Lizard map in that apartment. This was my first map. So this was a self-published map. It was a labor of love. It kind of holds up today, but not really, but it shouldn't. I hope my design skills and technology has progressed significantly since then. And that map sold reasonably well, and then suddenly I was a freelance cartographer, still working in a bike shop. So it was a little bit of a side hustle type thing, but it opened up a lot of doors. The biggest door it opened within about 2.5 or 3 years. After that, I started working for the University of Maine at the Canadian American Center, which is a cross-border research think tank. And I was hired there to be the lead cartographic designer on a historic Atlas of Maine project that they were putting together. It was supposed to be a 2-year gig. And I thought, oh, that's great. I'll go up there, we'll do that for a couple of years, and then we'll see what happens. Well, the Atlas is a very complicated project, and academics, things move very slowly, especially $1 million grant-funded projects that you're trying to piece together. So it took 12 years to make that Atlas. So I was at the University of Maine for 12 years. But again, as an outdoor rec lover, man, Orono, Maine, if you've ever been up there, it's up by Acadia National Park. It is the edge of civilization on the eastern seaboard. You embark north of Orono and Bangor, and you are in some serious wilderness up there. It's fantastic. I got to explore all of mid-Atlantic Canada in my decade that was up there, and the kayaking and the boating up there is really good. But that process, this Atlas process, this really honed my skills as a cartographer in a way that I couldn't fathom when I signed up for it. Of course, it told me it was going to take 12 years. I might not have signed up for it. But that Atlas was published. It won a ton of prestigious awards. It's still in print. That's the publisher standing next to me, Mike Alpert. My hand is cramping because I had to sign 400 copies that day. But this project was so complex. There was so much data. There was so much storytelling. There were so many design puzzles and problems to solve on it that it really made me into the cartographer that I've since progressed into. Part of that was I didn't have a background in historical cartography, really. So if you talk about adventure cartography, like you can't get much more adventure than trying to map an unknown continent in the 1600s when you have to commute there from France in a ship. And you have to wait for the weather patterns and the wind. So Samuel Champlain, the guy spent his whole life doing this, commuting from France. You know, there's no email, there's no telephone. There's seasons he didn't get back. They just assumed he was dead, because that's usually what happened to those explorers. But nope, he couldn't get out because ice. He showed up the next year, and they're like, ah, you're alive. What do you got for us? And he put together that coastline that you can still interpret as northern Maine and Cape Cod and Newfoundland and the St. Lawrence Seaway and the entrance into the Great Lakes. And he did that by sailing on the coast and drawing it, right? So when we're making, I'm not hiking a trail and drawing a line, right, that this is the trail. But what I love about his map is it's storytelling, right? These old maps, if you think about how exotic that was in an area with a world with no television and no media, hardly any books, he's sharing the flora and fauna. He's like, look at these berries. We don't have these berries in Europe. Look at these nuts. What are these? Look at these crazy fish we saw in the sea. Look at these people we met. So this whole idea of like how you could take a map and really draw people into it was in there sort of informing my life as a cartographer working on this Atlas project. I got involved with some great trail maps up there too. This is only one example, I did quite a few. The Thoreau-Wabanaki Trail, we took Thoreau's journals and we worked with his writings and we placed them on the landscape where he wrote that. And we did a map in conjunction with the Penobscot tribe, because Thoreau hired Penobscot natives to be his guides. And this map's really cool. And again, this gets back to the genre they call this as narrative cartography. So we've got Thoreau's words, his descriptions of what he's seeing in the landscape. We know where he camped. That red dashed line is a section of his canoe route, and the numbers are where he overnighted. We also worked with the tribe to engage with the native place names, because if you've traveled in Maine or hiked the Appalachian Trail to Maine, you can see the AT coming up through that landscape. This is Moosehead Lake. Maine place names are really, you know, at first glance, you're like, where did that come from? Passamaquoddy, Passadumcook. Well, then when we use the native place name above that, you can see, because those place names are basically a legacy of a phonetic interpretation from a French or English explorer trying to talk to a native and being like, oh, this is what this is called. So they're typing it in a French or English language. But now the native tribes have their alphabets, which is a little different than an English alphabet. And so we were able to work with them and bring that information into the landscape. So when the Atlas project was done, I wanted to do something else. I wanted to put my attention back to Purple Lizard. I kind of thought Purple Lizard would have died in that 10 years, but it didn't. That map I made of Rothrock State Forest, that kept going. People kept buying that map. I kept updating that map. Kept making that map a little bit better, but I wanted to try to do something more. And so that brings us into sort of the how we do what we do now. We don't have a giant sailboat, we just have a big truck. But what makes us different, largely, is that we are in the landscapes that we map. We're in the field, doing the work, experiencing the landscape. That's the geographer in me. That's the most satisfying part of it. I think it informs our maps in a way that makes them really special, because we've been to most of those places. And I know what you're looking for when you go to that place, because if I couldn't find it, I want to make it easier to find on our map. We talk about the field work, of course, and we talk about the hours. We don't keep track of how many hours our maps make. It would be probably too disheartening. We know they're easily over 1,000 hours a map. A lot of that happens in the studio. And there's 3 of us working on this, and my wife Justine, who's in the audience here. She's a huge part of Purple Lizard as well. We bring in data. So you guys know data. There is so much data on the internet now. When we started this process, when I started this process as a cartographer, it was an additive process, which meant you sort of started with a blank slate and you were like, I need to bring in some data. What am I going to do? Maybe I'll scan the USGS topo map and draw it myself to get this stream or this river or this trail. So it was an additive process. Now it's the opposite. It's become a deletive process because we can mine so much data, right? We can get data from state agencies, from township agencies, from state forests, from national forests, from the Nature Conservancy. We can go to Strava and get heat maps. We can go to Trail Forks. We can go to Garmin. We can go to Map My Ride, Map My Hike, right? There's so much out there. Most of it's not very good. So we bring in all this data, and we're trying to figure out what this map is going to look like, where the map ends, what scale makes sense for this map. We're trying to sort through what's real and what isn't. And that really only happens most efficiently in the field. So this is a picture of our truck. We are running a tablet, which usually has, we can toggle between any of those other data sources. We can stream from, if we want to pull up Google Earth or Avenza. We run prototypes of our maps on it to check our accuracy. We're running it also on a phone. So if we want to get out of the truck and jog down a trail, we have the phone with us to collect data. We're using the Garmin GPS that most people might buy and have. That's in the upper left on that screen. To see what it's telling you, because we're looking for contradictions in data. And then the Toyota one on the screen in the middle, which just shows us basically in a giant green field, which is not uncommon. And then our map printed out, like we have on the back table, but we tile it off in sheets on this big clipboard. And that one is what we're making notes on, for the most part. In this shot, I've got whatever the state forest map is on the steering wheel. I'm sort of comparing their data, the map you would have gotten at the trailhead for free, and trying to figure out how that matches up to what we're trying to show. And oftentimes our map, because the scale is better, there's a lot more detail on it. So their map just can't really show what we're trying to show. And although we have tablets and we have digital and you can drop pins and you can type in notes, this is far and away the most efficient way to work in the field, is the old-fashioned way of making notes on a map. And that's a great example of like a first draft. We brought in all this data, and you can look at that and be like, it doesn't look like anything's right on that, right? So that's the data that's out there, and when we drive out on there, we're like, this intersection's not like that, and that road's not like that, and this trail's not there. And there's these other cool things on the landscape that we would like to include. So we spent a lot of time driving around, making notes. We have a lot of time with pens in our mouths. This is Justine. And if you got a good eye for maps, you can tell this is probably 5 years ago working on the first Ohio Pile map. So that would be the Yuck Reservoir and Confluence upside down, because she's got it oriented the direction of travel. She's driving south somewhere on that map and making notes and trying to figure it out. State land and private land. So the biggest thing of our maps, when you look at that, is the color palette. If it's in greens, it's public land, right? So that means we can all go there. If it's in a softer yellow, that means it's private land. Doesn't necessarily mean you can't go there, because there are things on private land that you may have access to at times. But we really want to show this difference. And we get feedback from people like that email that came in where they're like, thank you, because I didn't really know what was going on. And this is a fundamental flaw of the public domain digital sources, because we find a lot of these. And this is the reaction to social media and blogs and Strava tracks and people saying like, hey, I found a great hike, or I found a great way to get on there. And maybe this used to be legal, maybe it didn't, maybe it's on the old maps, but we don't want to put this on our map. We don't want to put you in a situation where you find this sign and you're like, this is not my afternoon. What's happening now? And we certainly don't want to put you face to face with a hostile landowner that could be a conflict. The other piece of data that's impossible to get from all those data dumps is, where do these roads end? Where does a township road cease to be a township road because they'll all show up on your Garmins and on the data sets. But at some point, that landowner said, hey, time out, no, I'm putting a gate here, you guys can't come here anymore. You certainly see that in areas that evolve like Deep Creek, where you've made a transition into resorts. We see that even in areas of heavy industry where the mining or timber industry has said, hey, you know, it used to be all right to let people back here, but no, time out. You're not playing well on our land and you're not allowed here anymore. And if you punch in your GPS and say, I want to go there, like it might very well, this might be the route that you're following on Google Maps until you get to this gate. And if you have one of our maps, you hopefully would have seen that coming and been like, no, we're not going to go there. We use mountain bikes a lot in our field work. That's certainly the most efficient way to cover distance on trails if mountain bikes are legal on them. We also dabble a little bit with e-bikes where they're legal. In Pennsylvania, e-bikes are legal statewide and state forest, the same as traditional mountain bikes, so that opened up a lot of terrain. And a place where we used an e-bike was on the Gap Trail. When we were working on the Ohio Pile map, we met with the Greater Allegheny Passage folks, and we had, from their data set, we had put all the mile markers, right? And then we had ridden it and checked it, and we're like, yep, matches up, matches up. And I met with them, and they said, oh, we actually found out they're all wrong. The engineering firm we contracted to put them in, they're all off by like a couple hundred yards. So we're getting the funding to have them all moved. And so they gave us the benchmark of where we could start, and then we spent an afternoon starting at that benchmark in downtown Ohio Pile and riding exactly a mile and stopping and dropping a pin and riding a mile and dropping a pin. Fantastic use of an e-bike for a day like that. Weather affects our ability. And as we all know, weather's huge unpredictable these days, but we, working in this part of the country, we usually are pretty well locked out. January, February, into March, it's hard to say. Some areas we might be mapping, they don't get much snow. Snow doesn't scare me, but ice storms scare me. We don't like that. When we are out in winter, we have to really outfit the truck differently. We have chainsaws on board. We have traction boards. We're set for self-recovery. We have overnight bags in case it's a worst-case scenario, and you're like, no, you're screwed. You're sleeping here tonight. That has never happened, but it's sort of always in the back of our mind. We've got basically we have our backpacking kit with us. So we have some dehydrated bags of food. Hopefully we won't have to eat. We can make coffee. Usually we're looking for the better weather days. That also helps us because they're longer days, right? So this business of being dark at 5, that is not conducive to long days of field work. So we love those long days in the summer. We can get out early and cover a lot of ground. We can usually cover about 100 miles in the truck on a day on dirt roads. Field checking things, finding trailheads, finding campgrounds, finding, like you'll know an area like the Monongahela National Forest has dispersed camping, but you don't really know where that is. And they are numbered sites. And this is the type of thing where we don't go out and put every dispersed site, but we use the ones that the Forest Service is interested in and approves us using. So there's always this conversation with land managers, and I'll get to that a little bit more. And like this quote was really heartening for us, right? Because this is what our maps are supposed to do. So this guy bought a map. He didn't realize it was going to like completely take him on this trip down memory lane. But that's fantastic. He looked at our map at a landscape he hadn't been there in 20 years, and he was like, oh my God, I got to get back there. Look how beautiful this is. I remember here, I remember there. So that's really, again, that's very like heartening for us. We love when that happens. This is a tradition, basic field camp for Justine and I. If we're out in the forest working, we'll often base out of a tent. We use a big tent, big footprint tent, because as you all know, weather goes bad, and if you have to spend 3 days in cold rain, a little extra space in the tent is kind of nice. That also, we want to be in the landscapes that we're mapping. So we want to have that experience. What's it like to camp here? What happens here? What's the vibe? Is this a really busy part of the forest? Is this a quiet part of the forest? We even since our maps do take a long time to make, it affords us, and we try to go there in different seasons. So like now, being in Deep Creek this time of year, right? This is very different than being here July 4th weekend. So we did that with Shenandoah. We went there like their busiest time, the third week in August, when the whole world is like, I didn't get a vacation, we're going to Shenandoah. So we can see what the crush is like and how our maps can inform that and make that experience more doable. And we also want to be there when it's dead, when it's all us. We interact with the locals. They come by, they're like, what are you guys doing here? What's going on? We do interact with the locals. The locals are actually like a core part of all of our maps. And with this project, with Garrett County and Deep Creek, we're not at the local stage yet because we know we're working with the land manager stage now, and over the winter and into the spring, we'll be trickling down more to the local level. But like this example with the Shenandoah maps, and so that's both maps laid out. That's the whole project. And these two women are river guides at Front Royal Outfitters. And so we had questions about river access. We've driven down to some of them. There were some questionable ones, and they were answering our questions. They were like, oh yeah, there are sites on the Shenandoah that river guides have access to that the public doesn't. Because we drove down there and we were like, well, how useful is this? It says I can't be here, I can't park here, go away. But I know on their website, like they lead trips out of here. So they're like, oh yeah, we can go there, but you all can't. That sort of local information, like that's invaluable. The other local information we get from grounds crews, maintenance workers. Like it's one thing to meet with management. Management's great, we meet with management all the time. But if you really want to know what's going on in a landscape, you talk to the people that grew up there and have worked there their whole lives, because they know where the old roads are. They know what's open, what's not. Great resource, and they're usually they're so happy to like look at that map. And again, this is really rewarding, because when you look at guys that are like, I grew up here and I didn't realize you could jump that ridge over there and get over to there. Like it lets them re-envision the landscape that they know, they thought they knew very well. They do know very well. This was earlier today. We started our day off down in Oakland meeting with the foresters down at Garrett Potomac Forest, and we spent 2 hours reviewing just their little parcels on there, not Savage, just Garrett. And it was very helpful. We had gone back and forth over the last few months with emails and screenshots and files and stuff, and we're like, well, your maps show this. We went out there and we didn't see that. And so this ability to sit at the same table and discuss it, we got a lot worked out today. And then in our usual fashion, that led to some questions. So we jumped in the truck and we drove around a little bit more early afternoon before we came here, figuring out some campsites we had missing down there. GPS has us all trained to do this fastest route thing, right? Well, where's the button that says I want the most scenic route? How about I want the most stressless route? How about I want the most enjoyable route? We don't get those options. That's what our little lizards do on our maps. So we find things. This is an example of, it's not really public land, but that's a township road. It's a covered bridge in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of beautiful covered bridges in Pennsylvania. Turns out that particular one's the longest one in Pennsylvania, and you can drive through it. But since they built the main highway 300 yards away, nobody knows it's there. But if you had our map, it's called out. It's got a little purple lizard on it. Tells you a little bit about it. Sort of like what we're doing with like Castleman State Park. If you look at Castleman State Park, you're on I-68. It's a little blip. Doesn't even show up. You're like, why would I go there? Well, if we put a lizard there and we tell you it's really cool, then you might want to pull off and have a sandwich and hang out there. Same this is another example of a lizard spot. The main highway runs through this valley in north central Pennsylvania. The only people that really know about this spot are hang gliders. It only takes 5 minutes to get to off the main highway, and it's a fantastic spot to go to. Our maps open up experiences for people, and we have those experiences, and we got to see this blue crayfish. Has anybody seen a blue crayfish in the wild? Nobody? Andy saw one. They're in Monongahela. I don't know their exact range. To the untrained eye, they'll all be blue crayfish, but apparently there's quite a few subspecies. They're protected and they're rare. And when we were working on the Elkins map, we just happened to see one. It's fantastic. And again, that whole idea of trying to get people to have an experience with our maps. These are just a subset of some of the emails we get. somebody opened it up and he was just blown away by the design of it, which is great. Like, that's what we're trying to do. I like the bottom one on this. That guy was so excited about the Ohio Pile map, he didn't even feel the need to go to Ohio Pile. He was just going to have his whole fantasy vacation just staring at the map that day, which is perfect. That's exactly what should happen if we can do that. We have a little disclaimer language. Justine is an attorney, recovering attorney. And so, we had to have a fine print, so we have this thing, and we don't guarantee access and all that stuff. It's an ever-changing world. And just for fun, to lighten it up a little bit, I was like, let's just add it, except for tattoos. Right? Sure. I didn't think it was really going to happen. Then people start getting tattoos with purple lizards on them. So that was like, oh, wow, okay, we're definitely making a difference now. This is interesting. Currently, this is what we have in our line, 17 maps. We have several in production currently. Garrett is one. We're also working on Wayne National Forest, which dovetails on our Athens, Ohio map, north of that. That one is a little bit stalled because apparently Mr. Wayne was not a very nice person, so the state of Ohio has decided that that is no longer going to be the name, and they're trying to figure out how to rename a national forest. So we were like, well, we can't put out a map called Wayne if you're going to change the name. So that should be figured out in the spring. And we've been working on another secret project that nobody knows about that you'll all find out about in the next 7 to 10 days or so. So that's our next map, which I'm not going to tell you what it is. So that's our maps. Gives you some insight into how we make them, what we expect out of them, and what we hope you get out of them. Any questions? Oh yeah, we subscribe to all of them. Yeah, we look at all trails. And I mean, I don't know what to say about that. Like we'll download tracks of it, but you can't implicitly trust it. Like it's sometimes they'll say like, oh, so, the Rocky Knob hike, it's a great 4-mile hike on Rocky Knob Trail. And you look at their track and you're like, Rocky Knob Trail is a 17-mile long trail. How are you saying it's like a 4-mile trail? It's like, oh, you did a little section of it. You didn't do the whole trail. Other things might be access. The biggest problem with them is public and private land. Because they'll be like, hey, we found this trail, or we did this hike or this mountain bike ride, and we look at it and we're like, you didn't realize you were on 1,200 acres of private hunting land, and so you got away with it that time. But if you were thinking you were going to do that the first weekend of turkey season, you would have had a very different experience, and those people would not be happy to find you mountain biking or hiking on their 1,000-acre private hunting club. So it's like you got to. I'm not saying you don't use it, because we certainly use it. Any area we're at, we look at those to see. We also use Strava, the Strava heat map. If you're not familiar with that, that's an amazing tool, because people who are on Strava, you upload your data, it adds all the data that's ever been accumulated in the entire globe. So you can look at a place and see the density. So it's a heat map. So the most popular trails will rise to the surface. And then you can see if you have a question about a trail and it doesn't even show up on Strava, you're like, nobody knows about this trail. This trail is probably not there anymore. So the question is, do we find areas that are marked private that aren't actually private? We do. And we talk to the land managers because, again, we want our maps to be a management tool for the land managers. We want them to be open to the public, but honestly, it's more important in many facets of cartography that our maps don't cause headaches to the land managers. And part of that is mitigating conflict. So there are some roads on the Ohio Pile map that exist on the ground that we, in conversation with park management, chose not to include. Because if there's a hostile landowner that's going to come out, if he's going to pull a gun on a state forest employee, he's like, we don't want you to meet that guy. We meet those guys. Luckily, we always have this get-out-of-jail-free card because we have the map. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, sir, we're working on this map. Would you like us to not have this road on our map? If you kill us, we can't make that happen. So it's trying to like, there are these instances. We'll talk to a township manager. They're like, no, that's actually a township road. You have right-of-way on it, but that family's a problem. So we just we'll take those roads off. Again, our obligation isn't to show every road and every trail. Our obligation is to make sure you all have a good experience. And if we know there's trouble at that road, I'm going to try not to send you down that road. Yes. Yes. Well, so I didn't talk about the software we use. Our maps are designed in graphic design software. Since they're art projects, we're using Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop and different terrain modeling softwares and some public domain contour line GIS packages. And Avenza is the company that makes the GIS plugin for Adobe Creative Suite. So if you have Avenza Map Publisher and Adobe Illustrator, you can import the shape files and the digital files and get them to potentially register and work with them in the GIS environment. It's not as robust as like an ArcInfo thing, but we're not doing like buffer analysis and environmental analysis and floodplain modeling and things like that. I just want to bring in, like, if you added 2,000 acres to the state forest, it would help if we could bring it in this way. Otherwise, you send us a PDF, and we scan it, or we bring it in and sort of put it in by eye. And so since our maps are made using Avenza software to then make that a georeferenced PDF and have them host it isn't that difficult. There's rules and parameters and things we have to do to massage it for that, but yeah. Usually 3 years. It depends on a forest. Like Michaud State Forest, we knew that's a very dynamic forest. They were in big trail assessment. They knew they were going to close trails. They knew they were going to build new trails. So if we know it's very dynamic or there's a big project, we'll sort of think we're going to revisit that in a 2-year interval. Most of our maps at the scale we're doing, because we're doing popular places, so hopefully it's dynamic. Hopefully there's changes. Hopefully there's new trails, not trail closures. You know, that's the biggest thing with our decisions. The last thing we want is for our map to result in less access. So that's part of like that private land. Like the locals always know they can go up Jones's Farm Road and get in there and that's fine. But when that hits social media or that hits our map, and then, you know, the term I get a kick out of, this was a term that was introduced to me in Maine. I don't hear it this far south, but they would say, we don't want people from away finding that. So the people from away, could be you just moved there. I learned in Maine that if you're not born, actually you could be born in Maine. If your parents weren't born in Maine, you're not a Mainer. You're still from away. Purple lizard. Well, that goes back to a little bit of my time in the outdoor industry. You know, I grew up skateboarding and mountain biking and climbing, and when I got into maps, man, I was like, this is the most boring product category ever. You know, Rand McNally. There was nothing fun about maps. So I wanted to come up with something that was fun, that was iconic, that would work without having to always have text. So there's lizards in all lower 48 states, and purple lizard. There actually are a few purple lizards. I didn't realize that at the time. There's like a purple-tailed skink. So purple lizard just migrated up there. When I met with Penn State Small Business Incubator and said I wanted to call it Purple Lizard Maps, they were like, no. No one will know. No, you can't do that. There's some people were like, you should call it Mike's Maps. I was like, no, I don't want to call it Mike's Maps. It's like, I want it to have a life of its own. It's not about me. So Purple Lizard worked really well. It was abstract. People are like, what is that? They remember it. It's a neat thing. It's actually turned into a much better thing than I even expected it to turn into. Whew, well, it used to be we chose our next mapping location rather organically. So when we just had 1 or 2 maps in Pennsylvania, we were looking for adjacent forests, right, to expand, because you had people that were like, hey, I love this map. I've been playing on this map for a couple of years, so wow, if you give me this map 30 miles away, I'll go figure that place out too. So it started with that organic growth. Then we started to sort of like step back a little bit and look at other destinations. So that we looked at northern Monongahela and Davis and Thomas. But honestly, like a lot of that grew out of like Justine and I just going out to play. Like we went to Davis and Thomas and we're like, this place is cool. And I kind of knew it because I had a legacy, as we were talking about earlier. I had raced the early generation 24 Hours of Canaan races back in the 90s there. So I had a legacy of knowing Laird Knight and some of the business owners and Blackwater Bikes, and I sort of stayed in touch with the new owners and a little bit of ties to the community a little bit. And we went in there and I was like, there's some other maps available there, but not like what we do. And so we started looking at that and we're like, well, this is neat. And that we still would like to expand that down. I mean, that's basically the northern, those 2 maps, Elkins and Dolly Sods. We want to continue that. It's 6 more maps to take that down to New River Gorge. And we, that might be my life's work. So we're trying to figure out how to do that. We've given presentations to the West Virginia legislature to talk about how they might help us do that. So we hope to do that. This project, we just, I know Zach over in Davis, he's building the trails in Oakland, so it was sort of like, and I'd ridden at Big Bear, I'd been part of the Dirt Fest things there over the years, so I sort of knew this area, dabbled in it, and it was a place that we'd always thought about doing a map of, and I talked to Josh Spicer, and COVID hit, and then everything changed, and then things were tabled, and then, so, but this map, this is one map, but we want to follow up with a map that picks up on Frostburg and goes to Cumberland and over to Berkeley Springs. So it sort of gets that whole Western Maryland panhandle, so to speak. And it dovetails when we were working on, this got on our radar when we were working on the Ohiopyle map, right? Because we were right there. And everybody was like, oh, it stops at the state line? Well, that's too bad. It's like, well, it's got to stop somewhere. That's the hardest part. One of the hardest parts is, how big is this map going to be? What's the scale? What are the ends of this map? Because everybody's like, hey, got to include my town, right? At some point, if you zoom out far enough, it's not a useful map anymore. So that scale has to be a balance of how steep are the mountains, how dense are the trails. We thought we were going to do Shenandoah with one map, and then we worked for like 4 or 5 months with that idea. And Justine and I were going down there, and we were like, we can't do this. There's too much. It's too dense. It's too. National Geographic does it on one map, and it's not that helpful to us. Well, 1 to 40,000, 1 to 50,000 is a sweet spot. Like if you think of a USGS topo map, that's usually too much detail. For reference, 1 to 60,000 is 1 inch to a mile. So when you get much over that, like with the Ohiopyle map, that got out of control. That got bigger than we wanted it to initially. And that's why that map's different. So we couldn't get the balance of Ohiopyle because that's so dense. And then we couldn't get like a sense of scale on the Gap Trail to at least like take it to Savage Mountain Tunnel so that you could see. And we wanted Mount Davis, the highest point in Pennsylvania. Like we had these sweet spots. We wanted the Laurel Highlands Trail, but we couldn't zoom out enough to take it the whole length of it. So we're missing like the 20 northern miles of the Laurel Highlands hiking trail. But there's nothing else around that little section of trail. So people still, they complain. They're like, why is the whole trail on there? I'm like, Okay, for starters, nobody needs a map to hike a linear trail. Just get dropped off in Johnstown and walk to Ohiopyle. Don't need a map. But we want, that's a lot of what we're trying to do is show connections. So we want to map landscapes and be able to show loops, with gravel bikes. The rail trail is great in Ohiopyle, but like the gravel riders have really ramped that up because on all our maps now that have a long linear rail trail, the more adventurous people are like, well, that's like our escape hatch. That's our end, because we know we can go adventuring out north, south, east, or west, and we can spill back out to that rail trail anywhere. And when we pick it up, we know, as long as we get our direction right, if we go that way, we're going to end up at our car. And it might have been a hard day of riding, but that last 45 minutes is going to be easy because we're on the rail trail and we're heading home. So we look for those loops. Like in modern trail building now, that's what everybody wants, is loops. The linear trail has its place, but most of us don't like hiking out and back on the same trail unless there's something fantastic to see at the end. We want a loop. Almost all of them. I think there's still 4 or 5 that we're working on getting massaged and getting on there. So the way that works, if it's a north-south split, so 2 sides of the map, if you buy the map on Avenza, that comes in as one giant landscape for you. So you don't have to quote flip the map. But if you look at like our Ohiopyle map, it doesn't work that way because one side is this big landscape of the Laurel Highlands and the other side is a detailed map of Ohiopyle to Confluence. So if that's your focus, you just buy that map. And if you want the bigger landscape, you get the other one. So they all pose certain design challenges to get them sorted out. For the most part, yes. We are, yes and no. So a lot of our maps have supporting sponsors on them. So that doesn't come close to covering our cost to produce the map. The map, we hope after 3 or 4 years in the market might start to be like a break-even type of a thing. Because when we go to do the revisions, that represents a couple hundred hours of work, not a couple years. And we're always juggling multiple maps at the same time because they have a strange ebb and flow. Like one of the reasons Garrett County map stalled was when we were calling this summer to meet with Savage and Garrett Potomac foresters. They were like, hey, that sounds great, but we're actually fighting wildfires in Montana. So it's like, oh, when do you want to have a meeting? And they said, how about November? All right. Oh, so I guess that gets tabled for a little bit. Yeah, all of that and money. This is a tricky business to scale up. But that said, there are basically 4 of us involved in this business. And like the cartography, none of us are working on the cartography full time because, we're also the people that put the maps in the envelope when you order them and mail them out to you. We're also our IT department, and we're our marketing department, and we're our advertising department, and we're our on-the-road department. So it is a tricky business to scale up, but that is like when I said we met with the West Virginia legislature, and we are sort of at this interesting point where I think we have some opportunities to get some state support because they're seeing that if we do maps of some of the more lesser used rural areas, that can really be an economic benefit to lift those communities up, to get people to go there. So, like with Dolly Sods, every now and then somebody will be like, order the Dolly Sods map, but it's got all this other junk on it. Like I thought it was just going to be Dolly Sods, right? Well, gee, I don't know who needs a map 2 feet by 3 feet of just dolly sods. That's starting to get a little ridiculous. But our whole point is dolly sods is great, but it's crushed. It's heavily used. And so many people go there, they don't understand if they drove another 35 minutes to Otter Creek Wilderness, man, they would be in deep wilderness and they would not see another person. Like that Elkins side is underutilized because of the pressure from the DC-Baltimore community that stops there. So same with like rural areas as you go down in West Virginia, that forest gets less used in the middle and then more used at New River Gorge. But it's all fantastic. So hopefully we can find ways to actually scale this up and be able to hire some more people and work with some more groups to do field work with us. Right now, like a thing like Shenandoah, we hire a handful of people. All of our maps actually, that's a big thing. This is what I didn't like in some of the other places I worked, is they didn't put their name on their maps. So Aaron Greb and Bill Wilgus are two of our cartographers. You can't see the other half of that part, but there's other names in that line. Everybody that works on maps on the project with us, we put their names on the map, because we want that acknowledgement. It's not just they're made by people. They're made by real people that are out exploring that landscape, and they take pride in their work. Yeah. It does. It depends. There's a couple of great examples I can use for that. So on our recent revision of Ohio Pile, they are building a nested trail mountain bike loop system at the top of Sugarloaf Mountain in Ohio Pile State Park. And it's actually a reclamation project. It was a clay mine, which is different. We don't usually run into clay mines, which I think will make a very interesting place to put mountain bike trails, but that's and so we make a note on the map and put a mountain bike symbol, and it's sort of like, this is a work in progress, but certainly pay attention to it, because I think they're going to build like 5 miles of trail this year and another 5 next year. Another place that's helpful from two sides is highway projects. So on our Elkins map, the Corridor H, the proposed highway from Elkins that will split, connect to the highway between Thomas and Davis from the east. So that's a very contentious alignment, and there's a lot of groups opposing that, because part of that will be building bridges on the scale of New River Gorge bridges, which blows the Blackwater Canyon viewshed, unless you really like giant interstate bridges in your viewshed. So we forecasted that on there, and it was a nice rallying cry that the local conservation groups could use to say, hey, this is what we're talking about. This is like, could you move this 10 miles north? So why does it have to transect Blackwater Canyon? That's a crown jewel piece. So we forecast different things like that. Where we have to be very careful is like rail trails. Because if we forecast a rail trail that's too much in its infancy, it's not going to be helpful for the project. It's going to rally the opposite. It's going to rally the landowners to be like, what? There's no rail trail coming through my farm. Rail trail projects, like the average to get a rail trail even off the ground is 10 years, just to start the conversation before you even get any funding to make it happen. And we all know there's like abandoned railroad things all over the Appalachian Mountains. It could be useful for that, but we run into situations where that might be on the table, but if we forecast it, it will actually work against that ever happening. Again, like the last thing we want to do is have our map result in less access. But we often put in the abandoned railroad bed data, so that's on the USGS topo maps where it used to be, and we don't give any suggestion that it's open to the public, but people will look at it and be like, ooh, look at that. Wouldn't that be neat? Informally, because government protocol of accepting data from an independent cartography firm that's not under contract by that. So yes and no. We share that data all the time. We make that available to all land managers. Like, hey, if you want those shape files of that stuff, I'm happy to give it to you. But they often can't just, they maybe can bring it into their informal layer, but they have to either hire somebody to do it, or their staff has to go out and collect the data to meet their protocol. What we often do, what they find really helpful, is when we share things like the Strava heat maps and the bootleg trails, because they can't keep up on illegal trail building. Some forests have a lot of problem with illegal trail building, so they're like, ooh, this is happening over here, and we don't know how to get a handle on it. Most of them are $17 or $18. I'd love to hit the lottery and have a little plane with my own LiDAR collection for trail use. But you're right. That data is available. You know, it's so high resolution that that's not really what we're using for our terrain maps. You know, our terrain maps are, well, like that slide that I brought up back in the beginning, it's soft. So we want it to be soft. We want it, the artistic side of it just wants to let you understand the steepness and where the canyons are and the gorges and the beautiful part of the topography. But often we will get things like the LiDAR data or stuff to get that level of detail. You can see the old railroad beds in that. You can see ghost towns and things like that in it. Well, thank you all for coming.